So good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Sabharwal, for inviting me to interact with the students today morning. And thank you, Rahul and Madhur, for having me on board for this special lecture for the final year students. This is basically on campus planning, and I tried to put it across specifically where it finds a very significant contextual reference to design and when campuses get integrated to our cities. I was briefed by Rahul that we have got three different verticals on which the studio is being currently organized and structured. So one of them is dealing with a educational campus, one of them with the hospital campus, and third, which was basically looking at some kind of another area of other campus development, which is being done for a very specific application, like we're doing for a biotechnology park. So I've tried to put together the fundamentals of campus planning and design for you today. And at the same time, I'll try to demonstrate some of our projects that we have done in this area. Uh, some of them are expansion projects, redevelopment projects. Some of them are new projects. And of course, I'll try to cover all the three categories of the studio that have been organized as part of your studio program. So we'll take off from here, and you can feel free to ask questions, whatever maybe intrigues you or you would be interested in knowing. So I'll be happy to answer those questions. So as we go along. So now I'll start with a quote with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru gave to the country when the country got independent, that we are actually engaging in a very gigantic task of achieving rapid, large-scale economic development for our country. And such development, in particularly with a very strong cultural heritage and rich cultural heritage, it's only possible when we engage with some kind of purposive planning. And education was always at the forefront of the development of the country and as part of the developmental planning of the country. And therefore, a lot of emphasis was being given on the development of institutional buildings and development of campuses. And that's how we got various IITs that came after independence, and then subsequently IIMs, and also the All India Institutes of Medical Sciences. Apart from that, now we have many more institutions of national importance, which includes also the schools of planning and architecture. We have the Indian Institute of Science and Education Research, ISERS, and several allied institutions which are highly specialized and offering education in various disciplines, which not only includes teaching, but also includes the research facility. So by and large, when we talk about campus, a large campus, campus actually is being compared on a small scale to a city. It's like a microcosm of a city, which is a closely knit, unified cluster of buildings, which are being connected through series of spaces, and they provide a very unique living and learning environment, which fosters academic and research activities. And by and large, even for the healthcare sectors, it also becomes a very significant generator of activities, and it contributes towards the physical and mental well-being of the people who are actually working in the hospital, who are being provided with healthcare, and also it services the community around us. Now, primarily, according to Dober, who has been one of the pioneers in campus planning and design, he divides the campuses into two categories. One are the homogeneous campuses, and the other ones are the heterogeneous campuses. So homogeneous campuses are ones which have got a similar style and mannerisms in which the entire campus is being conceived and integrated. It follows a very specified set of typology, expression, and materials, and it is all consistent throughout the campus. However, for the heterogeneous campuses, they are actually created by virtue of having very disparate kind of individual buildings, and they have all distinct entities. They always are not in harmony with each other, but they still come together by virtue of various other aspects of design, So maybe in many cases, it's the landscape which becomes the stitching factor, or the public space design becomes the stitching factor, and they still become a comprehensive whole. So you get a set of buildings which have got their own unique identities, but then they still come together to provide their desired outcomes in terms of development. Now, if you look at the critical models for development of campuses, we basically have the concentric pattern, the zonal pattern, the molecular pattern, which are fundamentally being used as the basic structuring principles for the campuses. Now, we have a theory which is called as a core and a periphery theory. And that core and a periphery theory is quite evident in the concentric pattern, where the academic buildings form the core of the campus, and they are then spread out through a series of rings where different levels of facilities are being dispersed, which primarily in a university building or for an institution building has the academic areas. It has got the amenities areas. It has amenities would mean all student-oriented activities. It may also have a very dedicated research block, which could be made evident, and it is plugged into the main academic core. Then we have the residential facilities for residential campuses, but they are all being layered, and there are transitions which are being designed from the core to the periphery of the building. Now, I'm going back to the principles of the Delhi Master Plan, which talks about the distribution of land in the university campus, which is fundamentally distributed into four broad categories. As per the Delhi Master Plan 2021, and which also has been suggested to be modified for this Master Plan 2041, where we are looking at the higher FARs being provided to the academic building. So as per the Delhi Master Plan, the 45% of the land area has to be dedicated to the academic buildings, which will have a maximum ground coverage of 30% and an FAR of 2.25. Then we come to the residential buildings. They are being considered in the category of group housing. So therefore, it would have a ground coverage of 33.3% and an FAR of 2. And then we have the amenities, which includes the student activity centers, auditoriums, seminar halls, lecture theater complexes, recreational areas, some commercial spaces, which are critical to the consumption of the academic community. They would all fall within a ground coverage of 15% and FAR of 0.2. So that's where there is a little discord. And essentially, a campus would have a 15% open area. Now, if you're looking at somewhere which is about 30% on an average, or 30, 31, 32% of a ground coverage, you are still left with about, say, 69, 68% of open areas, of which about 20% would go into your circulation. You top it up with another 5 to 8% for parking. So effectively 30% gets added.
Sir, am I audible? Sir, your slide is not getting changed. We can still see
I'm
the
not changing it. I'm just talking because this is something which is
fine, sir.
beyond the slide. So this is an add-on which probably gives them an overview on that. So I'm holding the slide for a while, so that let them understand how development controls let the campus grow. And then we end up having effective areas which are almost closer to about 30-35%, which are the interceding spaces between buildings. Now that's where the catch lies, where you begin to design for those interceding spaces which become public spaces of the campuses, and they become very integral part and a multifunctional space that is being created. Now, something that you need to understand and appreciate within a campus, whether it is a homogeneous campus or a heterogeneous campus, but ideally, and the good campus structuring, which you see, would form a very homogeneous character of a building, but there are varied aspects to it. If you look, most of the campuses which were being designed in the UK, which are also called as a set of red brick universities, they all followed a very homogeneous character. They were very compact, close-knit campuses, and they followed a similar typology expression and materiality, which makes it a very cohesive whole. Most of these campuses were actually located away from the city, and they were meant to be a specific or separate entities in themselves. On the contrary, if you look at the campus planning tradition in the United States, most of the campuses are urban in character. They were actually being housed in the middle of the city, and they become integral to the structure of the city. So there's a huge diversity that exists. And on the contrary, if you go back to the history, we followed a lineage from the British model, which was basically creating campuses away from the city, and they were meant to be like ivory towers. And that's how most IITs came on the periphery of the cities. But the very specific aspect of transformation of a city being a very dynamic entity in terms of its growth, it grows, and slowly the campus becomes an integral part of the city. Now, the corollary to this understanding is that if this is a phenomenon that exists, then I think we need to be designing campuses for an urban situation. And that's the reality. I mean, the past experience has demonstrated that the campuses become integral part of cities. So, for example, any campus that you look at, maybe it's IIT Delhi or IIT Kanpur, IIT Madras, IIT Mumbai. I mean, you name it. All these major campuses have become integral parts of the city. And therefore, it is important for us to look at campuses largely in an urban context. And it has to have a very strong contextual reference. At the same time, it finds a very strong connection to the neighboring areas in and around it. At the same time, the developmental controls of the city or the master plan or the zonal development plan of the city has to account for the kind of land uses which are conducive and compatible to the land uses within the campus. And both the campus and the city have to coexist, and therefore they need to synergize between themselves. So these are the critical areas where we need to be very, very clear and articulate. Apart from that, we also need to recognize what should be the quantum of land that a campus should actually have in a very strong urban context. The reason being, the land values are very high. And from that point of view, in the recent policy that we were talking in terms of the national education policy, and also in terms of the high value of the land, which is premium, I think it's high time that we look at the campuses which are not horizontal, but they tend to become more vertical. And therefore, the development controls, as I said earlier, has been revised for academic buildings, which is being considered at about 2.25 and residential at 2. That means on an average, if you're looking, you are getting about 7 to 8-story structures which are there. If you modulate the ground coverage, you may still get higher buildings, but effectively a mid-rise up to 8 to 10 stories is a good development because it optimizes the cost of construction. It does not add to the cost of services, and therefore it becomes a very, very effective method of development. Apart from that, choosing to go a mid-rise also gives you the flexibility of planning and expansion. See, the campuses are bound to grow, and they are not being designed for maybe a few years. They've been designed for centuries. So therefore, all campuses should have that flexibility and inbuilt redundancy for expansion. And that's the integral part of this. Now, going to the second pattern, which is primarily the American model of the campus development, is the zonal pattern. Now, most campuses here have been planned by virtue of very critically defining these zones, as has also been done in the Delhi Master Plan, where academic, residential, recreational areas are all being dispersed in different zones, and the interceding spaces between those zones come together. And that stitch is being done by virtue of the network of movement or by through integrating the public spaces, and they bring the whole integration of the campus through series of such spaces which are interwoven into the fabric of the campus plan itself. The third category is the molecular pattern. Now, in this case, the whole development is being done in a molecular fashion. That means every small development is an entity in itself. However, when it keeps on expanding, they become an integrated campus as a whole, and every molecule at each stage is fully developed, that it can perform and it's operational. And it also translates into distributed molecular components, which have to be integrated as a centralized campus by virtue of the public space design that could be undertaken for them. Then there's the last pattern which is being utilized is a very linear pattern. And the linear pattern of the development is whether the buildings are being set along a linear spine, and every component of the campus, which is again part of the same use-based pattern which we found earlier in the linear pattern, they get integrated and they continue to make a central space, and then the campus expands either linearly on the x-axis or the y-axis, and they continue to have its own set of expansion which happens along the central spine, and also they continue to expand vertically on either sides of the central spine. So that also becomes very integral, and campus continues to grow outwardly. This also has an advantage where you can build the campus where the central core gets developed in the first phase, and the subsequent expansion can be taken horizontally on either sides of the central spine, and it can grow incrementally. Now, something which is important for you to recognize, that campuses are never constructed in one shot. It takes several decades to complete a campus in its entirety. And therefore, there is a component of incrementality which is being associated with the campuses, and they need to be characterized, structured, and developed in a fashion which is both in terms of the spatial characteristics, in terms of the integration of technology, in terms of the laying out of the infrastructure, in terms of the mobility plan for the campus. So all these have to be planned right from the inception, that the incrementality is embedded into the entire process of the development of the campus. Now, the critical design parameters which affect the development of the campus form is primarily defining the objectives of the facility or the campus. And what is the fundamental objective of developing that campus and the purpose? So what it means is that the intent of developing a campus needs to be very clearly qualified by the promoter or the client, whomsoever it may be. And then it is along this that we have the philosophy of design, where we embed the principle of the intent and how the intent is being translated or manifested in the philosophy of the design, which may be dependent on several determinants of the design, which I will come to it in the subsequent slide, that what are those guiding principles that which will become integral to defining the intent. And at the same time, it is embedded through the policy of delivering quality education and a vision for the entire campus, which has to be well drawn as to how we actually position the project, what is the kind of vision that we have for the project, and ultimately it fulfills the objective for which it is being designed. Then the important part is that what are the kind of resources available to us? And mostly these resources are critical. As I said, that the campuses will have to grow incrementality. Therefore, incrementally means it will have to have a series of phases. So multiple phases are being worked out, and the campus will have to be designed that each phase plugs in to make it a complete whole as we go along. Now, a lot of these are also governed by something which is the statutory guidelines, which I just mentioned to you as per the Delhi Master Plan or any developmental plan which is available, and the development control rules, which define the requirements of the development of the campus, and they are the guiding principles which have to be pursued and followed by any designer in compliance of the statutory guidelines. Now, something which is important is to again to recognize fundamentally is the value of the land on which the campus is being developed. So therefore, the site characteristics and its immediate context in the urban setting or the rural setting, or its catchment or influence zone becomes very, very critical. Now, apart from that, the significant part of that development is the responsiveness to the climate. both at the macro level and at the micro level. And then we come down to the critical aspect of the campus morphology. Now, the idea of the word, I don't know if you recognize understand the term morphology. Morphology as a terminology is a very comprehensive word that we use, which defines multiple dimensions of a campus, starting from the site, the responsiveness to climate, the movement systems, the accessibility, the open space system, the kind of urban form, the climatic response, the kind of flora and fauna, the natural settings, the gradients, slope, the connectivities to the campus, public transport connectivities, so on and so forth. So ultimately, it actually translates into a huge urban armature, and that is quite akin to what the campus is, and also the way we also talk in similar terms in terms of the city morphology, and the two needs to blend with each other as we go along. Now, this is something which is when we talk about the attributes of the responsive campus design, it primarily gets distributed into 4-5 very critical areas. Use, which is the building typology, imageability that it offers in terms of visual aesthetics, activity structure, and maybe it might have a very strong heritage connect, which would be very important. The efficiency in terms of circulation networks, the spatial efficiency, the accessibility, the flexibility, which allows us for expansion. And then when we are doing any kind of an add-on to the campus, it should be embedded in the principles of conservation and preservation, where you are trying to use the heritage buildings as very significant markers, which have got great association with the city and the people and the community of the campus who connect themselves with those buildings. And that's true for most universities, as I was talking about in Europe, in US, and in the South Asian countries, where they all have some very significant buildings. I don't know if you've seen, we have one of the oldest engineering colleges in India, which was the Thompson Engineering College, now IIT Roorkee. And it's being characterized by the main building and the architecture of the main building and the space that actually qualifies that building as a very majestic building, designed in Doric style of architecture. And it becomes a landmark, not only in the city, but it's the campus is actually known through that building, which is the Sir James Thompson building. And that's what you always see when you look at the IIT Roorkee campus. So most buildings then become an important landmark, and they provide a lot of legibility to the larger structure where the campus is being developed. So if I look at the broader parameters of or attributes of responsive campus design, so it starts with the nature of site, the resources, the choice of materials, the available technology, the educational objectives, and all this when amalgamated, it translates into the philosophy for the project or the campus, which is embedded through functional requirements. And in case it's an expansion, there could be also some kind of pre-established patterns which are very well qualified, or the learnings that we have from some pre-established campuses which guide us towards as to how the campus should be developed, what are the kind of attitudes and intentions, as I just mentioned, and then the kind of influence that the government would have in public sector institutions, or the governance pattern that we have in terms of the private sector institutions, and also the climatic responsiveness of our buildings. So what translates this into is where we define the level of facility. And this will be very critical, particularly from the point of view of both educational campuses, and I mean all campuses for that matter. And what are the requirement of equipments, support services, functional requirement, modular coordination, and then the selection of available technology and the materials which would be applied to the campus. Now, the other attributes also includes the aspect of permeability, which actually is qualified by the open space structure and the kind of interceding spaces that I just talked about. The second other attribute is the robustness. That means the kind of available space that we have has to be very robust. That means the attribute of being robust is one where the space has the capability of being used in different ways. And it could be multifunctional in its characteristic, and therefore it provides that kind of flexibility of its utilization. and they are the most significant spaces within a campus where most associations get developed. And most associations are also contributing to interactions that happen along the campus, and they become an essential part of our large collective memory of the campus, which we live with. And therefore, we always say that student life is one of the finest, eras within a lifespan of an individual, where you cherish the best part of your life in your university or your educational campus, and that stays with you for your lifetime. And it is those spaces within the campus where you have spent your time, where you have interacted with your friends, the way that that space was being utilized, and the quality of that space, that the way it was being articulated, becomes so very important in establishing that collective memory that is so important. Now, there's something which is called as visual harmony. Now, this again connects back. I mean, you need to be correlating it to both the homogeneous and heterogeneous campuses, where horizontal and vertical rhythms are very important in any campus by virtue of the way buildings are designed. The scale and the form of the building is very important. Now, there are three things which are fundamental to any campus or for any building for that matter, which is being designed in a specific context. There are three kinds of relationships that you should be understanding and appreciating. There's one, the first relationship is between form and the form. That means there are two building forms, and they may be serving different purposes, but there has to be a dialogue between those forms. So what is the vocabulary by virtue of which these two buildings talk to each other? Now, this could be by virtue of the attribute of coherence or continuity, where the typology, materials, and expression become an integral part of that coherence. Then the second part is the relationship between space and the space. So there are a lot of spaces, both internal and external spaces, but there is a relationship between those. And how these spaces again come together, they are being connected and they are being used as a larger integrating component, where the entire set of buildings are being dispersed on a larger plate of the land. So therefore, the space-to-space relationship, therefore, there becomes very, very significant. And then the last one is the relationship between form and scale. That means the way the articulation of the campus is being undertaken, it is either the space that defines the form, or the buildings are so done where and were so disposed that it is the form that defines the space. So both vice versa are possible, and that's entirely depends on the concept that you take for your development. So what are the components that need to be considered as part of your campus development? Is the structure plan for the campus, which also translates into the master plan, which embeds the expansion of the campus being designed for flexibility, the hierarchy of movement, both at the pedestrian level and vehicular level, the open space structure, the envelope control, that means the footprint of the building, which essentially means the ground coverage, and the volume which gets connected. Then we have the volumetric control, which is controlled by the scale and the FAR. So there is a great relationship between the ground coverage FAR. And then we have the edge controls. The edge controls are qualified by the kind of setbacks which are being defined by the developmental controls. And then the most significant part, which is both relevant internally and externally, is the interface between buildings. So this is where it is important. How does the campus find its interface with the city? And the second part is that what is the interface between buildings and different typologies of buildings, right? And the last part is the how facade of the buildings are being controlled, which probably becomes a specific aspect of continuity or coherence, where the building elements are so articulated that they continue to find a reference or they become a vocabulary which controls the facade, and maybe it connects the building types, and it becomes like a homogeneous outcome of the buildings. Now, the other aspect which is very significant for the development of the campus are the safety of buildings. Now, this could be in terms of the seismic safety, could be from all disaster risk reduction methods, DDRs, which are very, very important. And I think in today's times, when we talk about it, I think most of it should be governed by the natural processes which are there. So nature-based solutions today are some of the best solutions that should be deployed, which are being developed as a consequence of the understanding of the site, reading of the program, reading of the context, establishing and mapping of what is around you, and developing a vocabulary which suits the development as a whole. And that's how the concept actually gets developed and derived. No concept can actually be derived in absence of this larger understanding of the contextual reference and maybe the various aspects and dimensions that we just mentioned earlier. So accessibility, as I said, is important. Safety in terms of fire safety, electrical safety, environmental management, they're all critical to providing safety to the user. And primarily, let me tell you, most campuses are very user-intensive buildings. And that's where the principles of critical thinking, principles of lateral thinking, principles of design thinking, they all come together. And the idea is to be designing the campus for the user. So the idea is that you need to be looking at a conceptual framework which uses the user-first principle. That means the priority is being loaded to the user for whom the entire campus is being designed, or for the campus community for which the campus is being designed. And their priorities, their requirements would always be prime and fundamental to any kind of design development or any design ideology that is being practiced for the development of the campus. So therefore, the critical design matrix translates into a community unit, which is in terms of both a student and the faculty, because that's what actually makes the academic community, the academic areas, residential areas, the interactive areas, which includes community facilities, sports facilities, recreational facilities, the system of landscape, the movement networks, the network of the infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Now, the guiding principle both for greenfield and brownfield projects could be summarized as a whole in these large, in very critical 21 significant aspects of campus design. So a campus has to have a vision and mission. Campus has to be sensitive to site and environment. The campus needs to respect the natural landscape and the biodiversity. The campus should have a response to the context and historicity of the area where it is being developed. The campus should have a very strong interface with its adjoining neighborhood or with the adjoining areas. The linkages of the campuses are important by virtue of its connectivity, both internal and external, and also to the public transport system that we're talking. The zoning of functions within the campus, again, is very critical, and that translates into structuring and the structure plan. The campus mobility within itself. That means while we are connecting it to the external mobility, we are also, or urban mobility, we are also connecting it to the internal mobility by virtue of very clearly defining the vehicular and non-vehicular areas. The campuses need to be designed for inclusion. Inclusivity is the way forward in the 21st century. And I think all buildings, campuses, cities that we design have to be inclusive in very nature. And it should meet the kind of diverse cultural and social responses that we have in the context where they are built. And it is an equity that is being established and it is being manifested through the design of the built environment. The typology of the campus should be responsive to climate. That means orientation of the buildings, the way they are being set out, how daylighting is being used, how ventilation is being provided, how we harness the alternative methods of energy, and how it is all translating into a very, very sustainable campus as a whole. And it contributes to the environmental sensitivity at large. And now the campuses have another big challenge that we need to be addressing, which is as a consequence of the climate change. We'll come to that a little later. So campus form again then becomes important as to how different volumetric patterns are being developed in terms of dispersal of the campus by virtue of integrating the ground coverage and FAR relationships, and the campus form is being developed. So here, what is important is the expression which is referred to by virtue of the materiality, construction technology, facade. the very significant aspect of a campus is placemaking and public space design, which is being undertaken. So the way components of placemaking are being experienced and are being designed are so critical in creating the vitality or bringing life to the campus. And maybe in many cases, most campuses are almost 24/7. So they may also have and support a great nightlife. Development controls I've already talked about. Phasing, I've also talked about again, is very critical because every part that you design has to become a part of the larger whole, but it has to be conceived right from the inception. The concept, the idea of landscape and open spaces and integration of landscape of open spaces is so important because, and particularly for heterogeneous campuses, landscape becomes a very integral part of the stitch of bringing these different components together. And therefore, the designed open spaces and in the interceding spaces, therefore, needs to be very well calibrated, organized, and articulated. Safety is a big issue these days in all campuses. So I think safety from all perspectives, whether it be surveillance, whether it be from the perspective of disaster risk, could be safety from the perspective of fire, electrical safety, I would say biomedical safety, or maybe managing the epidemics also, or the pandemics that we just saw recently. They're all critical aspects of safety. And I think a new paradigm for design needs to be developed where we are able to look also at issues which would be very critical from a biological point of view. Ecology of the campus, again, is very important. So how ecological footprints are being taken care of. And by and large, by virtue of the very nature of the campus actually acts like a lung in a city. That means it's characterized by low-rise or high-rise or mid-rise development, but with large open spaces as compared to the densities which are around the campus. And therefore, it actually becomes a very important aspect of providing the kind of macroclimatic conditions to the campus itself and to the areas around. The next are the campus utilities and services. They are so important because this also has to have a component of modularity, which can be expanded at large as we go along. And they become the lifelines of the campus. And they all need to be integrated and conceived right at the inception and should be designed for a plug-in based system. Campus sustainability as a whole, from all points of view, whether it's be reuse, recycle, or renew, I think they all become integral part. I think we're talking about zero discharge campuses. We're talking about net zero campuses these days, and they're being designed for those purposes, and they need to be articulated in that fashion. The last and the most important part is campus resilience. I think the campus has to have an embedded quality to be able to absorb the change, able to absorb the climatic change, the natural disasters, and also is being capable of accepting and adapting those positive changes, which again reinforce the very structure and also contributes towards the growth and expansion of the campus at large. So I'll get to the first level of the projects which are connected to the healthcare facility planning. And most healthcare facilities are integral parts of the cities and they service the community at large. And therefore, their siting and their development becomes very, very integral. These are some developmental controls which maybe you can, the group which is looking at it should look into it. And this talks about the various distribution of various category of hospitals. Basically, there are three levels of care: primary, secondary, and tertiary. So we are looking at the hospital typologies in terms of general hospitals, specialty hospitals, super specialty hospitals, and medical colleges. And it gives you a very clear distribution of number of beds, the area required and the area per bed, and also the corresponding site area, which was being done with respect to the Master Plan 2021. And that's what I derived for the design of some of our projects. Now I'm showing you one such project where a hospital campus was being redeveloped for a 500-bedded hospital. So primarily the campus, the way it was structured and which was being articulated in terms of the accessibility There were three primary zones, and there was one existing building, which you see in white in the center, was one which had to be preserved because that was the heritage building that existed around. So we wrapped the new hospital building around the main building, and then it became a very important aspect of its integration and was then interspersed by various functions in terms of housing, some training centers, nurses' hostels, staff hostels for the staff, because it was not an educational institution, it was a hospital. So we basically had a hostel for nurses and hostel for the residential areas for the doctors, and being distributed through series of green spaces, which could be used by different users at different point in time. So if you look at it, it had basically a public realm, a semi-private zone, transition zones, and a very well dedicated private zones, which were being used by the communities in different ways at large. Now, the specific aspect of the design that was being followed was establishing the public and private realm, establishing the visual foci using the heritage building, the important magnets within the campus, the generators of activities by virtue of its use and functions, transitions and the intermediate markers, then looking at the whole scale, which was looking at the kind of development which also humanizes the scale, creation of boulevards in the entire campus where you could actually walk through those areas as a pedestrian campus, and creating a loop road at the periphery, and the central area was all being left for the pedestrianization and pedestrian movement. The spatial hierarchy was again articulated with respect to use, open and built from relationship, community continuity and coherence, legibility and permeability, horizontal and vertical rhythms, the magnificence of the entire building and structure, and finally making a signature of the as a signature building in the entire urban context. So we had this set series of hierarchy of movements, and then that's how it was being articulated as we went along. So the different kinds of urban forms got created. You see the site section and how the volumetric control from it was developed. The very function demanded a high-rise building at one end, and then slowly it was managed to the scale where it came to the residential buildings, and we moved along. It had series of these unit-level open spaces, cluster green spaces, large urban green spaces, and the public green spaces as part of the open space hierarchy. Now, by and large, we look at the hospital planning as a concept. I'll just briefly touch upon the hospital planning concepts, which is being actually developed as a collective effort of the architects as part of the design team, doctors, the hospital administrators, the paramedical staff, the kind of service providers, the engineering teams. So they're all important in the way hospital planning is being undertaken. So ideally, one needs to take a very important integrated approach to the design of hospitals. Infection control is the biggest problem that we face in these hospitals these days, which is as a consequence of the hospital-acquired infections, and it's a global problem that is being addressed. And from that point of view, patient safety therefore becomes very important, both from the active side and the latent side. Environmental control, sick building syndrome, which is important, and control of bacteria and bacterial infections being expanded. Reduction of the indoor air pollutants, the aesthetics and the interior environment, socio-cultural aspects where the building or hospital is being built, biomedical waste management, and then something which is a fundamental where we talk about diagnosis before treatment. That means you will treat a patient once you have actually diagnosed the real problem. So you have to have a very strong diagnostic facility which is available, and from there that decides the progression of the treatment. Emergency and trauma are again very important aspect, because most patients do roll it into emergency conditions, or maybe could be a trauma-based condition for various reasons, such as it may be, would be medical emergency or an accidental emergency, and they need to be provided for the medical aid and facility. And correspondingly, there are hospital services and infrastructural services which needs to be worked upon. Hospitals are very high intensive cost-oriented projects. So therefore, cost modeling for expansion phasing are important. Standardization and optimization strategies are important for planning in a hospital, and this should translate into the right kind of phasing and development and plug-in system for both lateral expansion and for vertical expansion. Ideally, the building should be designed in a hospital because it's an operational hospital at one point in time, that all expansion should be designed laterally because vertical expansion has a series of problems in the operations of the current hospital. So therefore, lateral expansion should be designed for hospitals, which is the right mechanism and a strategy to do that. Pathfinding and signages are important. The use of alternative therapies, which is popular these days, should be integrated to the core therapy which is being provided. Could be in any stream in which it is allopathic, homeopathic, Unani, aromatherapy, physiotherapy, alternative medicine. All those things become important. And at the same time, which supports medical tourism and the disaster preparedness for a project. So primarily, there are 5 important areas in a hospital, which includes the uh, outpatient department, which is the OPD, the inpatient department, which is IPD, emergency and trauma services, the diagnostic areas, and the services, hospital services at large. Now, the important aspect of the operational and functional planning of the hospital includes its use and efficiency. The equipment planning is the most important, and systems design, because it's the equipment that decides the special planning. So if you decide the equipment, because the level of, that's why I said the level of facility will be the determinant of the level of equipment that is going to be housed, and therefore it has to be designed for that purpose. Then we have the patient psychology and the healing environment which needs to be provided. We also need to respect the privacy of the patient, the interior environment, thank you, and the circulation, both at the building level and at the external level, and the kind of flexibility of expansion that the hospital provides. So I think it becomes a very important aspect, and hospitals these days are very important imageable components in the larger urban landscape. And therefore, we need to be very, very cognizant of the fact that the imageability of the hospital being a very, very important segment in the entire urban landscape needs to be looked into. And all these dimensions, when put together, should lead to the final proposal of the hospital. So a critical design matrix need to be developed, and which should be integration of all the above that I have talked about recently. And the critical guidelines should be broadly distributed into 3 areas of efficiency, flexibility, and imageability. The efficiency should be include balanced growth and circulation. Flexibility should include expansion and multi-use functional spaces. Imageability should be translated into symbolic form and the strong identity in a healthcare facility. Now, the infrastructure issues should include the aspects of waste management, the institutional mechanism for the entire hospital waste management, segregation of waste, isolation, disposal, monitoring of facility, process control, and system linked to both visual and audible warding for differently abled patients, accessibility and so on, sewage treatment, water supply, electrical systems, internet connectivity, satellite communications. Now, we are also talking about things which are connected to the telemedicine. So therefore, it becomes important. Communication networks, power backups, core facilities, centralized pipeline system, and the rainwater harvesting systems. Apart from that, we need to be looking at a sustainable campus from the perspective of alternative energy sources, energy efficient design, thermal comfort conditions, noise and air pollution control, water management, waste management, soil stabilization, sustainable sites, reuse of recyclable materials, and disaster risk reduction that I have been talking. And this applies to practically all types of campuses that you are dealing. So I think we need to be talking of all the energy efficiency measures, water conservation measures, measures which enhance the use of alternative energy sources, and they can very well be manifested through the design of the built environment. Now, this is an example of what the AIMS campus and the way it is being congested, and now it's going into redevelopment. So the blue area that you see are primarily the upper part of the campus are the main hospital buildings, and on the rear part of the campus are the residential areas. They have expanded the residential areas across the road, which is behind the Safdarjung Hospital, and that's the residential area, which includes the staff housing primarily on that side. Then we see the example of a homogeneous campus, which is the purely a hospital facility, which is the Indraprastha Apollo Hospital. And it has basically two prime blocks with the OPD block and the OPD IPD block. And then we also have the emergency with that OPD block on one side, on the other side. And we have the emergency and the IPD block supported by hospital services and a nurses hostel alongside the main campus. Now, this is another interesting example, which is the Escorts Heart and Institute Center, which is now Fortis. And they expanded their hospital and they got a very special approval from the local authority where they had buildings across the road and they were allowed to create an underpass between the two buildings. So they integrated the old building, which is the IPD. They did an expansion, what you see in the images. So the top left is the old building and the bottom two, the top and the bottom one are the expansion of the IPD areas. And then they connected the OPD onto the other side along with some residential facilities. And an underpass was being provided to connect the two building blocks and the hospital becomes one single entity. It's a very private use underpass which has been provided. So primarily, if we conclude, I think it's very important that we create happiness for the user and going to the hospital is never a very healthy requirement, but in case we avoid, it should only be translating into giving you good health and should just remain with you as a bad memory for a time and which passed away. Now I'm coming to an educational campus which we worked on and it was part of a very strong urban campus. We designed this campus which also included a medical college in the city and this is the Allahabad University campus where we were commissioned in 2006 and we worked for this campus for almost about 12 years. And this total campus has grown over three different periods, starting from 1887, which is the first campus that you see. That's the Muir College campus. And it is a truly urban campus. There are total 10 campuses interspersed in the city. And this that you see is also along the two major highways. One is the GT Road, which comes from Delhi and Kanpur and goes right to Varanasi and further up to Calcutta. And the other one is the Lucknow Highway, which is on the other side. So the campus is actually abutting two major highways. And the total land area that was being developed in these three campuses was about 356 acres. And we added another 72 acres of medical college, which was again along the side in the city. So what you see here are buildings, which are the blue ones are the existing buildings, the one in pink, which are being added. Again, you see yellow buildings, light yellow buildings, which are the existing hostels, and then the dark yellow ones, which are the more newer hostel buildings and facilities. And then the whole structure of the campus was done by integrating the city as an integral part of the campus development and reinforcing the connections between these three campuses. So the first campus came in 1887, the second campus came in 1920, and the last one that you see came in 1964. Now, this is exactly was the old plan of the city of Allahabad, where you see the two rivers come to a confluence at Sangam. But what you see right in the central circle is the campus, which becomes the heart of the campus. And today, as part also of this smart city mission, the area around the campus that we designed have become the part of the area-based development projects for the smart city mission. Now, these are the different phases as I was talking. So there were first, second, and the third major campuses, and they were allied, areas which are being owned by various, organizations which provide residential facilities on a community basis. So they are privately owned, but they are also integral part of the larger campus system, as we talk about. We went through a very elaborate process for redevelopment, which had a very well-defined process, which included the audit and then subsequently the outcomes of the audit, both at the quantitative and the qualitative way, translated into identification of critical factors, the typologies, as I have already talked about. All those components were integral part of the process, leading to the key outcomes which translated into the derivatives for the intervention into the campus. We had significant heritage buildings, so heritage buildings had to be integrated as part of the larger system of design and also being used as a visual foci in the structuring of the campus as a whole. And then a campus of this stature and also being a public funded university, we had to plan it for a 15-year period. Now, let me tell you something. Normally, campus plans are done in three categories. There's a short-term master plan for a campus, which is for about 5 years. The mid-range master plan is being done for 10 years, and a long-range master plan is being done for 15 years. So the two campuses that I will show you that we designed and redeveloped were all being done for a long-range master plan, and the period was qualified to be 15 years in both the cases. Now, this was the basic understanding of the distribution of land parcels, the connectivities, the condition of structures that existed, what are the buildings which were very poor and could be removed and could pave way for new additions to the campus, how the integration between the three could be established by virtue of reinforcing the street between the two campuses and three campuses, and how significant nodes could be modified and developed to become a very significant part of intervention of the larger redevelopment of the campus, which would add value not only to the campus, but also to the city at large and to the student community, which come from all around the region of Allahabad. And let me tell you, Allahabad University was also known as the Oxford of the East. And when established in 1887, I mean, the university which was established prior to this was in the 1882, which was the university at Lahore. But then in the north of India, Allahabad became the most significant university after the three universities that were established in 1857, which included the University of Calcutta, University of Madras, and University of Bombay. So in north, Allahabad University was the most significant university, and this was controlling all other affiliated colleges in the north of India and in the central province, in the central India, once this was established in the year 1887. So we looked into multiple dimensions and we did the analysis of the existing structure and the way the campus properties existed and what could be the method of articulation and leading to the way the resources that were available and the mechanism by which the three campuses could be stitched. So we did a detailed SWOT analysis for the existing campuses at the micro level by doing a very detailed audit of each campus and identified what are the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities which we could actually exploit at both macro and micro level for our intervention. So this was the existing figure ground plan, the land use plan, and the volumetric plan of the campus. And then it translated into series of ideas as to how the integration of campus areas could be undertaken, what could be the tools that could be deployed, and we defined the objectives of development and as to how it could be done. And this is a part of a homogeneous campus, so different buildings were done in different styles. They also had varied typologies. So we used the heritage buildings as a very significant marker in the entire campus and tried to stitch and develop the entire building in and around that. So these were the structuring tools that we used, which we had the movement, associations, clustering of the components of the building types, identity, the patterns of growth, the critical design factors, how to bring about coherence and order, and the typology, imageability, and the legibility of the campus. And this was the final comprehensive master plan where you see re-articulated systems. The campus was actually pedestrianized by using the external roads of the city as the critical access points, terminating into parking lots and thereafter becoming all pedestrian in the central core of the campus. So this all was being done over a period of 12 years and it was being done incrementally. And several buildings have now come up on the campus, which have been done in part. Now, this is a very important aspect of land parceling. And the parceling was done after the structure of the campus was established. And all newer buildings that you see were marked in different zones. And this became the basis of the cost modeling for the expansion and also the phasing of the various buildings as per the need and demand of the university as specified by the user. So the stakeholder utilization was critical. Demand from the stakeholders was well structured and articulated. And also the funding and the grant mechanism from the Government of India was become very critical to this. This led to series of creation of public spaces, and there were 4 or 5 critical areas which become the great public spaces of the campus. And so there were the critical public spaces in terms of the critical malls, the squads, the crescents, the larger squares, and the residential development, and the development of the external areas as interfaces of the campus. So you see all these part areas were picked up and detailed out in detail to become large public spaces in and around the building typologies, and how the structuring was being done to create an experience for the user, where we tried to keep the old heritage buildings as the main axis, and the movement was being articulated alongside that kind of development. So you see the all buildings which are in the orange color are the new additions by the newly articulated systems of movement integrated to parking lots, and therefore becoming a pedestrianized campus. And all these malls that I was talking about, the crescent, the malls, they were all being created by virtue of the articulation of the campus. Now, these are different ways by which those important experiences were being embedded into the movement system in 3 different campuses. And the large public spaces of the campuses were being derived, with the entrances being qualified, the landscape being handled, and so on and so forth, apart from integrating the recreational areas and the reinforcing the sports facilities of the campus at large. So that was the Mayor College campus, the first campus. This is the second campus, that was the 1920. This is the third campus, which was 1964. And these were the adjunct properties which were being designed as central lecture theatre facilities and the administrative complex for the university. And these buildings have been designed, executed, and they are functional as of now. So these are the, if you see in totality, it gives you a nutshell how 3 campuses came together and how structuring open space system, movement systems, articulation of typology, and all those things were being integrated. These were some other parcels of land where staff housing was being designed in different parts of the city, and add-ons were done. And the lower part you see is the integration of the 2 campuses to the city network, and how the spine was being developed as a very significant development for connecting the 2 campuses, and also improving the edge conditions of the city at large. Keeping the historic characteristic of the university, we also designed signages which were vandal-proof, and they were specifically done in stone and engraved with stone so that it could be free of vandalization, but it also adds to the historic character of the campus at large. Now, the next campus that I'll come to is the one we did was the Jamia Hamdard campus in New Delhi. It's again a long-range master plan, 2015 to 2030. And this also had a very diverse range of buildings, with buildings done by various architects, including Stein, who did the main management block for them. And this is how the contextual interface was being established, where we have a Jahanpana forest, the Tughlakabad fort on the other side, the Air Force Station, Tughlakabad fort, and the lower area is the Sangam Vihar, which is a very large unauthorized settlement, and the other developments of GK3 and development along the Mehrauli-Badarpur road, as you see, becomes the critical part, and also the Tughlakabad extension on the northern side of the campus. So this campus was established in the 1962, and thereafter it is a professional university offering all professional degree courses and programs. And they were looking at the redevelopment as a consequences of the new development controls and also the expansion requirements of the university. Now, if you see from 1962, the evolution of the campus could be seen from 62 to 75, 91 to 2005, 6 to 13, 76 to 19, and then finally, again, what we could intervene was from the period which was from 6 to 13, and you could see the diverse style of the buildings, the kind of open spaces that existed. And since it started basically as a system of Unani medicine, so the whole concept of the campus and the structure plan was put against the four principles and thematic principles of the Unani medicines, where there are four aspects which are critical in a Unani medicine. One which they call it as phlegm, which is in the Urdu term is balgam, blood is dam, yellow bile is afra, and the black bile is soda. So this basically, there are the four core areas, and these were being interpreted into four zones of the campus, which were basically phlegmatic, sanguine, melancholic, and choleric. And that's how the structuring was being done, which was being embedded into the same principle of Unani medicine, and that became the underlying principle of structuring of the campus. So these were the initial sketches that we did in terms of articulation and interpretation of the campus and how additions could be done, and how integration of different components and additions could be structured and worked out. So a structure plan was being developed by looking at the movement system in and around the campus, the access points, the designed public spaces, the incidental public spaces. And incidentally, this by virtue of the landform, there's a 15-meter drop from the north to the south end of the campus. So there was a very drastic drop from the top to the bottom, and that's how it got structured. Now, these were the critical diagrams that we established in terms of what structures are good in the condition, what was the open areas, how the movement patterns work, where were the visual aspects of the campus existed, so potentials of exploiting the visual areas, how the conservation of the natural landscape could be done because by virtue of the terrain and topography, how the vistas can be created by articulation of that, and how the components of the campus could be unified as we go along. So ultimately, this was the final master plan that came about, and the whole area was again put through a system of loop roads and also integration of the components, reinforcing the research areas, residential areas, recreational areas, as per the existing development control. And the new master plan was done with a lot of emphasis on very important nodes of the campus and the public spaces that were being designed. So this was the larger open space system that got created, and the topography was the very, very important overriding component. We also conserved and preserved the natural species of plants, and more plants that were being planted on the site were in the same sequence of the natural vegetation that existed in the Japana forest. Now you see a different series of sections which were being developed, and the landform and the depression in the landform was being used. No area was blasted on the site. The depression on the site was being used for parking purposes because the parking load was very, very high. And there you see the way buildings were being articulated for the both old and new, and the landform was being integrated, and the urban form of the campus was being derived. Now, these are series of those campus level sections that were being drawn, and it has these academic buildings, facilities, and also the residential buildings. But certainly you see a transition from the ones which are low-rise buildings to the high-rise buildings, which were eventually planned for the future growth and expansion. We proposed a transport demand management system by connecting it to the Badarpur metro station. And now we have the new metro line, which is going to come on the same axis of the campus. So a complete shuttle service was being provided, which could bring students from the Badarpur metro station to the JHU through the urban transit system and also through our own system of movement. We were trying to look at strengthening the connectivities from the various nodal points, and therefore the system was being derived on that basis. Now, these are some of the diagrams of some very key public spaces that were being designed in the campus, and they were the important intermediate markers in terms of design, and they were all being articulated individually. So if you see in the entire campus plan, you see a hierarchy of movement and articulation of intermediate transition spaces for the public space design. And they become important markers to create those associations that I was talking about for the students, which becomes a part of their collective memory. So was the focus of the campus, and the only way we thought we could stitch the campus was through landscape because of the diversity in the architectural characteristics that existed. The only way was to use landform to our advantage and bring about that unity and to bring that stitch in various building forms and spaces together as we go along. Now, this was the whole idea where we designed all these public spaces from ideas to the real drawing that you really saw. And various urban design controls were also being established for the new buildings, for the open space system, and which were also being marked. So now what you see here is a very interesting comparative condition analysis of what was existing, which is on the top, and what was actually derived in terms of figure ground, movement, open spaces, and uses and dispersal of uses in a comparative matrix. Now, these are the new and proposed buildings that we added on the campus besides the existing ones, and different zones were being articulated accordingly. Now, I'm moving to the last segment of my presentation, which is the Microsoft campus, which is being designed by the RSP from Singapore and also partly by the office in India. And this is again being designed in different phases. And the very interesting part is that they have tried to create a public realm at grade here in terms of integration of this. So I think this is the third segment of your problem that you have. And so Microsoft Hyderabad campus fosters equity and flexibility through innovative design. And it has a very clear expansion program and the way it has been articulated. So if you see the dispersal at the lowermost picture, you see those building forms being dispersed, and it is being connected through a leveled integrated system, which integrates buildings at different levels. So there's a public realm at the higher level, and there's also public realm at the lower level. Now you see there's the differential articulation of the forms, which looks at the different ramps that have been provided, outdoor terraces spaces, pedestrian connectivities, the connection from which is a business to business connection, B2B, B1 to B4 connections, which they call. Then there are pedestrian ramps which have been articulated so that universal accessibility is provided, and a very strong emphasis on the landing forecourt or the entrance forecourt has been articulated, and it almost has about 15 lakh square feet of built-up spaces, which have been integrated in the large part of the campus. And you could see this through the articulation of the management of topography, the levels that have been created, and the way parking management has been done in the entire area, and the way building sets itself into the larger urban context. Now, these are some of these images of the places where congregational spaces have been articulated, landform has been used to the advantage, creating open amphitheaters, the large landscape greens, which are integral part of the development, and also the kind of outdoor external spaces, which are the social spaces within the campus. Some of the larger imageries of the building, and see how it sets itself into the rocky terrain of the city of Hyderabad. The building depth has been so articulated that it maximizes the use of daylighting with asymmetry as a very integral part of the expression, but yet tries to bring the whole building together. So atrium has been designed, and it also allows for some kind of seamless integration, but it becomes a landmark in the entire urban landscape of Hyderabad. So you could see how the sustainable components have been added, louvers have been added to shade the glass, the parasol roof has been provided, and multiple such elements have been used with very, very careful and subtle use of materials to bring about the coherence in the various building types of the building. So primarily, these are some of those same images and the connectors that you see between blocks, which is all about. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your patient listening.